This is part 3 of my series on the great work, and today we're going to start off with the topic of spiritual currency. Spiritual currency. The two spiritual currencies. This is something that you really have to pay attention to. There are two spiritual currencies, and these are time and attention. This analogy can be seen very readily in the sayings spending time and paying attention. Whatever information or endeavors we put our time and attention toward, we end up getting something in return for that investment. This return could come in the form of knowledge, understanding, skills, expertise, and empowerment if we invest our spiritual currencies wisely. And if we are to do this wisely, then we should seek to improve the quality of our attention by placing it upon information that is capable of improving both ourselves and the human condition as a whole. Such an effort would also constitute a valuable investment of our time. We should ask ourselves, what am I spending my time on? What am I paying attention to? And most importantly, what kind of quality am I getting in return for these investments of my spiritual currency? Here's a little illustration that I think might be helpful. How our quality of attention affects our world, okay, in accordance with the principle of correspondence. Again, correspondence is one of the principles, one of the Hermetic principles. On the left, we have what we call a pure information stream here, inputting into the individual and outputting into the world. On the right, we have a poisoned information stream inputting into the individual and outputting into the world. So what we want to try to do is make sure that our information stream is not poisoned or is not some kind of propaganda or not some kind of something that is going to block the truth. Kind of an example here, an illustration of how we spend our time. What are we paying attention to? Shows a bunch of people just sitting there being hypnotized by the boob tube television, spending a lot of time on something that is really not going to pay dividends. Here's another example of how we might be spending our time. So over here we have books, okay, which the Latin is libre, freedom, and it also means books, okay. So through books and through knowledge that comes from books, we're gonna have a good dividend. We're gonna have a good payoff, as opposed to the internet, constantly being on the internet or constantly being in front of a screen, much like constantly being in front of a screen of the TV medium, television. This is going to be a lot better for people in general. Natural law, also known as, or the law of cause and effect, law of attraction, karma or moral law, or the golden rule. And you see the description here, law of cause and effect is effect invariably follows cause. For every action there exists an equal and opposing reaction. The law of attraction, the energy you emit is the energy you attract. Energy flows where attention goes. As you think, feel, and act, so you shall be. Karma or moral law, you reap what you sow. Golden rule, do unto others as you would have done to yourself. Here are some natural law expressions, or how it works. Natural law expressions. The recognizable workings of natural law in human life take place through 5 basic expressions. Each of these 5 expressions have a positive and negative aspect, giving us a total of 10 overall natural law expressions. Let's go down the list here. We'll start with expression number 1, which is generative polarity, what we use to create. The positive aspect of that would be love, or consciousness. The positive aspect of the generative polarity is love. In regard to natural law, love should be seen as the expansive force for consciousness. Love is the force which helps us to become open to truth and to expand our awareness. So the negative of this expression would be fear or unconsciousness. The negative aspect of the generative polarity is fear. Fear is the contractive force for consciousness. Fear is the force which influences us to become close to truth, and the force which ultimately shuts down our awareness. The second expression would be initiating expression, how it starts. Positive would be knowledge, acceptance of truth. The positive aspect of the initiating expression is knowledge, or the acceptance of truth. Knowledge positively influences the quality of our lives because it positively influences our decision-making processes in every area of our lives. The negative of this initiating expression, refusal of truth. Here's something that we really need to look at here. That is media brainwashing, or being hypnotized by the mass media and information that is not beneficial to us, propaganda. The negative aspect of the initiating expression is ignorance, or the refusal of truth. Ignorance negatively influences the quality of our lives because it negatively influences our decision-making processes in every area of our life. It is important to remember that ignorance or ignorance should be distinguished from nescience. Nescience means not knowing because necessary information is not present or obtainable. Ignorance, on the other hand, means not knowing even though necessary information is present, because that information has been willfully refused or disregarded. Here's a relevant quote by Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Another great quote from Samuel Adams. No people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor can any be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. On the contrary, when people are universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink under their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. Socrates, the only good is knowledge, and the only evil is ignorance. Here's a good one by Mark Passio, who incidentally I want to thank for supplying these slides to the general public so that they may pass on this information. Willful ignorance in the presence of knowledge is the measure of a bad person. Ignorance or ignorance is the root cause of all evil. Since only knowledge eradicates ignorance, it is our duty and moral obligation to educate ourselves as well as the masses around us. Let's go to the expression number 3, internal expression. What happens inside us? Positive is sovereignty or internal monarchy. In other words, we are our own rulers. The positive aspect of the internal expression is sovereignty, or what I call internal monarchy, one ruler within. As a state of consciousness, sovereignty means that one has unified the three aspects of their consciousness, such that there is no contradiction between one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. Sovereign is derived from the Latin adverb super, above, and Latin noun regnum, rulership or control. Thus, sovereign means one who is above the rulership or control of another. Sovereign means not a subject or a slave. Sovereign, not a slave. A sovereign is a monarch, mon or mon, one, archon, ruler, a single ruler who rules only the kingdom of self. Sovereignty is a state in which one controls one's own thoughts, emotions, and actions, and by bringing them into unity, non-contradiction, non-duality, attains mastery of one's own consciousness. So self-control equals self-mastery equals self-ownership, not a slave, not being a slave. On this third internal expression, or what happens inside us, the negative of that would be confusion or internal anarchy. The negative aspect of the internal expression is confusion, or what I call internal anarchy, no ruler within. No ruler within is not good. No ruler without is good. Confusion is the state of mind in which the being is ruled by fear and ignorance. Confusion could be seen as internal opposition or being torn apart from within, such that one's thoughts, emotions, and actions are in perpetual contradiction to each other. On to the 1, 2, 3, 4th expression, which would be external expression, or what happens in society. The positive aspect would be freedom or external anarchy, meaning no rulers. Here we have an illustration of the chains being broken that are imprisoning mankind or mankind on the planet. The positive aspect of the external expression is freedom, or what I call external anarchy, no external ruler. True freedom for all should be seen as the goal of spiritual development. Such a state can only manifest as a result of human society's adherence to natural law. External expression, positive freedom, negative control, external monarchy. The negative aspect of the external expression is control, or what I call external monarchy, one external ruler. Control is the pathway to all forms of evil and destruction. It results when a society lives in direct opposition to natural law. Let's go to the 5th expression, manifestation, the result we create. Order, manifested good would be the positive. The positive manifestation is order or manifested goodness. Order represents everything we say we want. Order results only when there is balance or justice, which can only be present when truth has been accepted and our behavior has been brought into harmony with natural law. The 5th manifestation, chaos or manifested evil in the negative. We already looked at the order. Now we're looking at the negative, chaos, in this the results we create. That would be the negative. Here's an illustration of chaos, or everybody grabbing what they can for themselves and not considering their fellow man. The negative manifestation is chaos or manifested evil. Chaos is the exact opposite of what we say we want. Chaos results when there is imbalance and injustice, which results whenever there is ignorance of truth and behavior, which is in opposition to natural law. So in a review of the natural law expressions, if we go down on the positive side, on the as far as the expressions, love, consciousness, knowledge, acceptance of truth, sovereignty, internal monarchy, freedom, external anarchy, order, manifested good. In the negative, we would have fear, unconsciousness, ignorance, refusal of truth, confusion, internal anarchy, control, external monarchy, chaos, manifested evil. Right versus wrong. It's not right versus left, morality. It's not right versus left, as we see the powers to be trying to turn people against each other, right versus left. It's right versus wrong. A deep understanding of morality, principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong behavior, lies at the very heart of natural law. Right would be correct, based in truth. It would be moral, in harmony with natural law, and actions based in it do not result in harm to other sentient beings. That would be considered a right. A wrong would be something that is incorrect, not based in truth, something that is immoral, in opposition to natural law, and actions based in it result in harm to other sentient beings. Knowing rights. Rights are most easily understood when they are considered through apophatic inquiry. This process helps us to understand what a right actually is by understanding which actions are not rights because they can cause harm to others. Apophatic inquiry, from the Greek noun, and here is the noun in Greek from the verb to say no. A method of logical reasoning employed when given a limited set of possibilities in order to arrive at knowledge by way of the exclusion of known negatives. Describing what something is by explaining what it is not. Affirmation through negation. Here are some natural law transgressions or harmful actions. Murder or assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, wrongdoings. These are all wrongdoings. In other words, every harmful action that a human being is capable of taking is a form of theft. Some form of property is always being stolen when a wrongdoing is committed. Life is a form of property. Rights are a form of property. Freedom is a form of property. These would all be wrongdoings, all summed up with the word theft. Natural law transgressions, again, a living being or their property must have been harmed in order for a violation of natural law or a wrongdoing to have taken place. Any action which does not cause such harm is a right. Again, this is very important. No victim, no crime. With that said, there is no such thing as the delegation of a wrong. In other words, if a specific action is not a right for any individual, then that action can be delegated, granted, or licensed, be delegated, granted, or licensed to any other individual or group and magically called a right. That action forever remains a wrong under natural law. I think this is really important, so I'm going to read it again. There is no such thing as the delegation of a wrong. In other words, if a specific action is not a right for any individual, then that action cannot be delegated, granted, or licensed to any other individual or group and magically called a right. That action forever remains a wrong under natural law. Natural law always holds true regardless of a population's belief systems, and this is under the heading of knowing rights. This means that it does not matter how many people agree that a wrong can be turned into a right, or that a right can be turned into a wrong. Such things can never be done in reality. People can only believe that they can claim such reversals and that this will magically make it so, which is exactly what governments do. Unfortunately, most human beings erroneously believe that it is morally possible for them to create and delegate rights which do not exist, or to take away rights which do exist. When in doubt as to whether an action is or is not in harmony with natural law, visualize the scenario of a world with only two people. If the behavior is either a right or a wrong, in that instance it remains a right or a wrong in any size population, regardless of how many people may believe otherwise. Knowing your rights, and this is the visualization of just two people on the planet. If it applies when there's just two people, well, then it applies if there's 1 billion people, or 9 billion, or 8 billion. Let's get into some specifics regarding rights. Taxation is the claim that a group of people who call themselves government, have been given the right to confiscate an arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor or a form of property. And that would be whether or not the other agrees to share that product voluntarily. Taxation is enforced by the threat of violence, or behavior resulting in bodily harm, or imprisonment, the taking away of physical freedom of movement. If those from whom the product is being seized attempt to resist the confiscation, this practice is always justified, made into a right, by those who claim that such a practice is necessary and required to uphold the common good. If we define slavery as the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being, we can clearly see that there is no magical percentage to which we could lower this number, other than 0, that would no longer constitute slavery. If we're being honest with ourselves, taxation is merely a euphemism for theft, violence, and slavery, the practices upon which it is actually based, since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of the product of another's labor. Such behavior can never be delegated to a group and called a right. Therefore, all forms of taxation are always wrong according to natural law. Let's look at prohibition. Prohibition is the claim that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right to prevent others from putting any given substance into their own bodies, and if those others refuse to comply with those terms, they will be fined or imprisoned. It should be self-evident that if any individual's body is actually their own property, then that of an individual always maintains the natural right to decide what will or will not be put into their own property or their body. Understanding this, we can easily see that the claim of the right to command what will or will not be put into the body of another person amounts to a claim of ownership upon the other person's body. The claim of ownership upon another person's body is called slavery, Therefore, prohibition is merely a euphemism for slavery, backed by violence, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim that such practices are necessary for the common good. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim the ownership of another person's body, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and called a right. Therefore, all forms of prohibition are always wrong according to natural law. And this would be, a good example of this would be telling you can't smoke cannabis, or another example would be telling you have to have an inoculation. In other words, either one of those two examples is a way for them to try to take control of your body when that is a violation of our natural law or natural rights. Here's another good one: licenses and permits. Our claims that a group of people who call themselves government had been given the right to prevent others from exercising specific behaviors, even if such behaviors cause no harm to others or their property, unless those others petition, beg, or pay the government for permission to be allowed to exercise those behaviors. This amounts to the claim that rights are merely privileges. You often hear that. Privilege. It's not a right, it's a privilege that may be granted or taken away by government based upon their preference or discretion. Remembering that the definition of a right is any action which does not cause harm to another living being or their property. There is no such thing as the right to stop someone from exercising a right, since rights cause no harm. The claim over the rights of another person is called slavery. Even more so is the claim to be God, the claim that the rights of others flow from you. Therefore, licensing and permits are merely other euphemisms for slavery, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are necessary for the common good. You always hear that. It's necessary for the common good. That's a cop-out, and who decides that? Each individual has to decide what is necessary for their good. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of another person's rights, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and called right. Therefore, all forms of licensing and permits are always wrong according to natural law. Force versus violence. We're going to look at something that is very important here. Force and violence are often spoken about as if they are the same and used interchangeably, when in fact they are diametrically opposed. They're polar opposites. And here we have the true descriptions. Force, the capacity to do work or cause physical change, energy, strength, active power. Action which is in harmony with morality and natural law because it does not violate others' rights. Action which one always possesses the right to take includes defense against violence. What is violence? Violence is the immoral initiation of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain. It is coercive action which is in opposition to morality and natural law because it involves the violation of others' rights. It is action which one never possesses the right to take. So here we have the difference between force and violence. Two diametrically opposed polar opposites. And in this regard, human beings possess the natural right to defend themselves from violence with defensive physical force. A person who is accosted by violence possesses the right to stop the person who is conducting the violence from continuing to do harm to them with any amount of force necessary to stop the attack, up to including deadly force. This is a right, a natural right. Does violence become a right when government does it? No, it does not. Violence is not a right when government does it, because they are intruding or they're harming another individual. Let's look at the two pillars to get a further clarification of how this works. The two pillars of enlightenment. Here we have the two pillars. Over here would be the sacred feminine non-aggression principle. Non-aggression. This is represented by the chalice or the downward pointing triangle. The first pillar of enlightenment is the sacred feminine principle, also called the non-aggression principle. This principle states, do not engage in violence. In other words, do not immorally initiate non-rightful use of physical power to coerce, constrain, or compel the rightful physical behavior or free will choice of another sentient being. On the left, we have the masculine principle. The second pillar of enlightenment is the sacred masculine principle, also called the self-defense principle. This principle states sentient beings have the inherent right to use force, to defend themselves from violence conducted upon them by another. Sacred masculine self-defense principle. These two work hand in hand. Sacred feminine non-aggression principle, sacred masculine self-defense principle. Remember, self-defense principle is not an aggression. Self-defense principle is a defense against aggression, Okay, people, so I'm going to leave it there today before I go any further here, because I want to try to keep these videos to about 30 minutes. So I will be continuing on with this series called The Great Work, and giving you information about our natural law and our natural rights. So until the next video, I will say adios and stay tuned.